She rushes towards him, and with a bright, almost insane look in her eyes, she demands to know if he believes in the goddess. This question takes him aback, but he immediately begins to reflect on the number of things he has lost because of the goddess. First of all, he was a saint, because the goddess chose him for a different path than the one he wanted. And along the line, he also had to give up his dreams, and was eventually kicked out by people he considered to be his own family. He had nothing to himself now because of the goddess, and he had basically lost everything. The question makes his heart burn with hatred, and he grits his teeth in anger. To answer the girl's question, he vehemently expresses to her that he hates the goddess. However, though the girl becomes less enthusiastic, she keeps a bright-eyed look on her face. Though he replies with fervent hatred, he reflects further on the question as he wakes up the next morning, recalling the time when he actually used to believe very much in the goddess. A memory comes back to him, a memory of not too long ago when he was still exploring dungeons with the crew, and then resting in towns after they were done. Back then, he, alongside Vince, Emmy, and Janet, was confronted by a group of people wearing scarlet robes with hoods over their faces. They were asked by this group if they believed in a god, and before they could even answer, the group's leader had already started to proselytize, talking about the goddess's watchful eye over all of them. In response to this waylay, Janet simply pulled her witch's hat over her eyes and turned her back to the group, asking her friends to do the same as they had more important things to do. Although Vince had tried to hold her back, they eventually left the group alone, and Janet began to explain the reason for her brusque reply to them. Apparently, these people were called the Red Salvation Society, and they were, according to her, a new conspiratorial religion that expanded on the doctrines of the religion of the sun goddess. Their job was to get new recruits for their little group, and they did this by telling people that the goddess was thinking ahead, and then convincing people to join based on that conjecture. At this, she asks Vince what would happen when a person enters the group, and Janet replies that after being led to believe in a new doctrine, they would say that the goddess saves only the faithful, and from that moment, they begin to charge membership fees, essentially preying on the members' fear of alienation to squeeze money out of them. The money they asked for was 30 pieces of silver a month, and the more a member gave money to the cause, the higher the person was in rank amongst the brethren. Although the baseline money of 30 pieces of silver was easily paid, many were able to join the group and easily keep up with the group's activities. After explaining this, Janet turns specifically to Russell and then tells him that he is very kind, but that he, especially, should be very careful with the group. Retreating from his memory, he walks down the staircase from his room and then turns his thoughts to more pressing matters, including his expulsion from his group, the new dungeon, and now the apparent application of religion to a goddess that he hates. As he leaves the house, he eventually meets the girl he met from the day before outside. She is currently playing with the kids from the orphanage, and on seeing him, she asks him for confirmation on if he is Russell. Although he isn't particularly pleased to see her, he wonders how she is able to get along with the kids so well. He then asks her if she is from the Red Salvation Society, and on hearing the accusatory tone in his voice, she frowns at him, and then asks him what he is talking about. Moreover, she asks him why he would think a beautiful woman like her would be found in the Red Salvation Society. And it is at this point that he comes to the realization that she is not wearing the same hooded red robes that those people wore when they accosted him and his former friends. All their clothes are blue, as opposed to the red garb of the society, and he then apologizes to her for being mistaken. She accepts his apology, then comments that if he finds it easy to apologize, she is sure he is a good person. However, one more thing is called into question. Russell begins to wonder why she asked if he believes in the goddess, when she herself is not a member of the Red Salvation Society in the first place. Although he doesn't have the answers, she interrupts his thoughts by asking him what he intends to do today. To this, he replies that he is going to explore the dungeon, and further explains that he wouldn't like for the village to have any more victims like Brenda's mom, Victoria. And again, the fact that the monster appeared in the village at such a time means that checking out the dungeon is of the utmost priority. On hearing this, the girl happily informs him that she would like to go with him. Just then, he asks her why she would do that, but she interrupts him by telling him her name, which is Sibylla. She then further explains that she is not like him, but despite her introduction, he refuses to let her follow him into the dungeon. She's taken aback by this, and she asks him why, but she doesn't even wait for him to respond, before she informs him that she is going to follow him despite the fact that he doesn't like it. At this, Russell designs his fate and doesn't say anything to counter her. Eventually, they start their adventure by heading to the Adventurers Guild, in Adria's section, where they would be able to register the things they would need for their adventures. Sibylla informs him first that they are going to create a new party together, and though he makes a noise of protest, she informs him that it would be safer for both of them to enter the dungeon as a group than to enter as individuals. This prompts Russell to evaluate her level and status. Apparently, the powers that were given to them by the goddess have growth value that is considered to be the level of the player. Russell first remembers that she was fighting with a dagger when they first met, and he finally figures out that she is a level 8 mage. In response, she, in turn, points out that he is a level 5 saint, and she comments that such is too low a level to enter the dungeon. However, she is taken aback by his status, and the fact that he is not only a priest but a saint, which is a much higher and more important role than a priest. After speculating on the abilities and status of the boy standing beside her, she then comments that he is funny, and she declares delightfully that she likes him. Meanwhile, they have been standing in front of the adventurer's shop for a long time, and the shop owner has started to get very impatient. Meanwhile, Russell starts to think about how the sisters back at the orphanage wouldn't like the fact that he has such a beautiful woman like Sibylla hanging around with him. He reflects back to the time when he used to be in the orphanage with his friends, and how back then, people in the village didn't seem to like him much. He concluded that it was because of his black hair, and the rationale that informed his thought was because the goddess is the dirty of light and brightness. And as a result, people usually looked at people with black hair like they were a bad omen. As he thinks about this, Sibylla informs him that they will decide the details later, but for now, they would have to form a party first. First of all, he asks her if she is sure she wants to team up with him, and explains that he doesn't understand why she wants to when they don't even know anything about each other yet. However, Sibylla brushes his concerns aside and informs him that she already has a name for the group he and she are forming. With a proud demeanor, she announces that she likes the name Oath of Dusk, and then explains that she thinks that darkness and blackness are a great thing. On hearing this, Russell is confused, and he wonders out loud why she, who believes in the goddess, would want to wear black, which is considered to be a bad omen. To this, Sibylla simply responds that she thinks he and she are a lot alike. Though he is surprised at her choice, he agrees to follow the name. She then suggests that they go to another shop to get the equipment, and when Russell suggests that they go to the weapons shop, she asks him why he wants to go there so quickly. At this, he informs her that he intends to buy a sword, and explains to her that the events of the night before proved that a saint could actually fight if they wanted to. He has been thinking about it for a long time, about the fact that he has bountiful experience with swords, and that despite the fact that he hasn't had a sword since he became a saint, his skills didn't seem to have waned at all. He then declares that from now on, he will fight as a swordsman using recovery magic. Soon after, Sibylla compliments him on his choice of swords and tells him that he looks awesome when he defeats the monster. However, she advises him to keep the robe he presently has on, because the tunic is light, strong, and resistant to magic. Apparently, it would be better to keep it than to trade it for something cheaper, and after quietly contemplating it, Russell then agrees with her. Now that they have gotten all the things they would need for their adventure, they leave the village, and soon after, they reach the entrance of the dungeon. As they stand in front of the dungeon, ready to go in, Sibylla lightly comments that it is a great day for exploring, but Russell counters by saying that the weather won't matter when they actually enter the dungeon. However, she chides him gently by saying that that's not what she means, and that she is talking about the fact that it will be quite dreary for them to go home when it is raining. However, Russell has more pressing things on his mind. Now that he is in front of the dungeon, he seems quite satisfied that he can actually see that his mind isn't playing tricks on him. Sibylla notices this, and she checks in with the guild and is told that nobody has yet ventured into the dungeon to explore it, and therefore, there is no outside information at all on what the inside looks like. The only thing that they can tell so far is that Victoria was poisoned when she went near the place. At this, Russell unsheathes his sword from his scabbard, and he then declares that it is their turn to explore it first. As he unsheathes the sword, Sibylla again comments that she knows he would look good with the black sword. Soon after, both of them enter the dungeon, and Russell informs her that he would like to go ahead while she walks behind him. However, Sibylla counters this by saying that in parties, the safest place to be is near the healer, and therefore it would make more sense for them to remain attentive and walk side by side. Russell doesn't offer any rebuttal to this, so she takes it as an agreement, and then the duo begins to walk side by side. Not long after, the duo stumble upon a goblin with a club. Sibylla is the first to express her delight, and she comments that this is the easy part. A glowing orb of energy appears within her palm, and without hesitation, she directs a large stream of flame magic toward the goblin, who is immediately engulfed by it before it has the chance to react. However, as she does this, Russell's eyes widen in extreme shock, coming from the fact that she used that much magic without even casting a verbal spell. He mentions this to her, but she seems confused about the fact that he hasn't seen magic without invocation being used before. After she says this, Russell deliberates on the probability that he is able to use that kind of magic. But before both of them can react, the goblin immediately stands up and rushes toward Sibylla before they can react. Russell yells out her name, but it is too late. The goblin reaches her first, but before it's able to do more damage, Russell quickly disposes of it with a powerful strike from his sword. Fluid gushes from the creature's fatal wounds, and Russell immediately turns his attention back to Sibylla, asking her if she is okay. It turns out that the goblin Russell had just gone against was another one different from the one that she had initially dispatched, and because she had let her guard down, she didn't see it before it attacked her. The injury that has been inflicted on her is not a big wound, but it is enough to sap her energy, and she explains that they would not be able to explore the dungeon anymore because of it. However, Russell reminds her that he has healing abilities, and he then tells her that if she is hurt, he will heal her. At this point, she informs him that the main characteristic of the Black Goblins is that they inflict poison with their hits. The poison they inflict also isn't the normal one, but is one that is difficult to cure, and one that causes a very terrible disease. As she says this, Russell reflects on the fact that Victoria was attacked by a monster who had this same style of poison, and before Sibylla can say anything, he invokes his healing powers, and then uses the cure spell on her without voicing the incantations. He uses the cure spell in tandem with the heal spell, and within seconds, Sibylla begins to comment that she feels better. However, she is surprised that he was able to use the spells non-verbally, especially considering that he just knew about non-verbal magic. But he only comments that he just tried it, and it seemed to have worked. Moreover, Sibylla comments that her injuries seem to have disappeared, and it seems like the poison has retreated away from her body. It is at this point that Russell also tells her that he used the cure spell as well. Sibylla also seems confused that he was able to do so without reciting the words. At this point, Sibylla then asks him when he first learned cure, and he then tells her that he learned cure at level 2. This makes her extremely shocked, and she asks him again if he is sure that was when he learned it, and to this, he replies affirmatively. She then asks him when he learned heal, and he tells her that he could use heal since he was at level 1. This surprises her greatly to the extent that she seems alarmed, and she explains that this is the first time that she has heard of a job requirement where the person can use the abilities from the first level. With her hand on her chin, she begins to deliberate on the abilities of a saint, and she is surprised because she didn't know they were this powerful. However, Russell breaks into her thoughts again and then asks her to watch him. As she watches him, he verbally uses the spell Wind Barrier, and she is immediately awed by the fact that he can use the wind barrier despite the fact that he isn't on a high level yet. Apparently, after fighting the goblins, he has leveled up to level 6, and this is the new ability that came with the level up. Apparently, the wind barrier is a spell that allows the user to block arrows with a barrier, and it is also able to repel some low-level magic from enemies. So Russell rationalized that it would be of great help to him when he is fighting against some of the weaker monsters who would not be able to get through it. Additionally, party members are able to pass through the barrier without issue, so it doesn't just help the user. At this point, Sibylla then asks him if he is sure he is okay with using all this magic power, and then she advises him that exploration of the dungeon would be a time-consuming thing, and therefore it would be best for him to conserve his magic power instead of using it to showcase to her. However, Russell counters this by telling her that magic doesn't usually consume that much of his power, and that ever since he became powerful, he's been able to use as much magic as he wants, whenever he wants to use it. This information shocks Sibylla, and she begins to realize just how powerful Russell really is. Even he doesn't seem to know the extent to which his powers lay, because his friends had made him seem useless in the first place. Sibylla is in awe of the guy in front of her. Apparently, he is an excellent swordsman, and he has the ability to use healing magic consistently and constantly. At this, She begins to wonder what someone like him is doing alone. Meanwhile, somewhere far off, the rest of the group traverses a village after a long day of exploring a dungeon. Vince still has an arrogant smile on his face, while Emmy and Janet seem to be more subdued. Despite noticing this, Vince reiterates to them that they do not need a healer, and although this doesn't seem to raise Emmy or Janet's spirits, he assures them that together, they would be the strongest group of fighters in the world. Although Vince is still convinced that they do not need Russell, Emmy has already started to feel remorse for being a part of the process of kicking him out. She begins to reflect, recalling the sweet memories of when she was a child, and would eventually lose things that she owned. In all of this, Russell would always be the one to help her find her stuff, because she was not good at finding them herself, and he always did so with a smile on his face and without complaint. Anytime she lost something, she would always unconsciously wait for Russell to put it in her hand while she was crying, and she had always thought that he would always be there to help her, even when they grew up. Now, things had changed. Things had changed greatly, and part of it was her fault. In the present, Vince turns to her with a smile on his face, and he urges her not to worry about anything, reiterating that they do not need the healer role, and that the three of them are the strongest group of heroes in the world. Standing there in her paladin armor, she doesn't look quite so sure. Instead, she looks sad, and she begins to wonder how they ended up like this. With more reflection, she remembers when she used to think that the four of them would be together forever, considering the fact that they grew up together. Even when Vince had told her to fight Russell, she didn't initially want to fight him, and she had just held her shield in a defensive stance. According to her, she didn't even know what had happened, and the next thing, Russell was on the ground while she stood over him. She begins to think she has done something wrong and unforgivable, but as she walks, she notices that Vince has started to look at Janet's body again. She then wonders what he was thinking when he had initially sent Russell out of the group, but at that moment, a voice interrupts her thoughts and she looks up. Standing in front of the group is the most beautiful woman they have ever seen, dressed in the most bodacious adventurer's uniform that has ever been conceived. The woman asks for confirmation on if they are the famous group of heroes around here, and though Emmy and Janet glare at her passively, Vince clearly is already taken in by her. To her question, he eagerly replies, yes, while blushing, and she then rushes to him to wrap herself around his arm. As she does so, she apologizes for bothering them like this, then introduces herself to them as Katie. At this point, Vince decides to play it cool, but he does a bad job of trying to appear detached. He introduces himself as the hero, and then introduces his two friends, Emmy the Paladin and Janet the Sage. On hearing this, Katie seems impressed that all the members of the group, including the hero, are in this position, and then she pulls Vince away, suggesting that they get something to eat, to which Vince enthusiastically agrees, and then offers to pay for the meal. As Katie and Vince leave, Emmy and Janet watch in disbelief, and Emmy thinks about the fact that Vince is essentially choosing to spend the group's money on the girl. Soon after, the four of them settle in a diner, and Vince then asks Katie what she wants to ask of them. In reply to this, the girl only simpers, and then tells Vince that she only wants to know what kind of activities the heroes group is doing and how far they have come. She also confides in them that she isn't trying to gather extraneous information, and that she's only a level 10 mage. Without thinking of the wisdom of what he is doing, Vince immediately begins to tell her everything the group has been through. He explains that it has been 6 months since they first got into the Hammond dungeon, and that so far, they have already advanced to the 8th floor of the middle lair. The fact that they have cleared 8 floors in 6 months makes Katie very impressed, and she asks them if they are already able to take on monsters like the Minotaurs themselves, to which Vince replies delightfully that she is very well informed. At this point, Vince begins to explain to her how the team forms when they battle. He tells her that Emmy is able to stop a Minotaur's attacks with her shield, and this further impresses Katie. However, Emmy humbly volunteers that she is only able to do that because she is a level 23 paladin, and that this is the only reason why she can face a monster that strong. But Katie brushes off her humility and compliments her that she is really cool. However, before the group can go further, Katie stops the conversation, and before anyone can say anything, she asks them why there isn't a priest in their group. This question stuns the rest of them into silence, and while Vince only stares at her, Emmy glares at her with anger, but Janet keeps an expressionless gaze on her face and doesn't even seem to be listening to her. Breaking the ice, Vince gains back his winning smile and informs her that all of them can use recovery magic, and that because of this, someone who can only use recovery magic isn't someone that they need. To this, Katie doesn't push the matter further, but she does comment that that sounds inconvenient. Vince's thick skull cannot comprehend the implication of what she is saying, so before Katie even begins to break it down for him, he starts to yell at the top of his voice, reiterating that they are all recovery spellcasters, and that they do not need a priest. Here he almost mentions the word saint, but he catches himself. He also mentions that a healer without the means to attack is nothing but a nuisance and a waste of food and resources. His voice has become so loud that Janet whispers to him to bring it down, because the other customers are watching them. He apologizes, and then Katie asks Janet if she knows the cure spell. At first, Janet feigns confusion at what she means, but then she admits that she learned the cure spell at level 15, and that she's now at level 26. Katie continues to ask questions, and she asks Janet when she learned the fireball attack magic, to which Janet replies that she learned it at level 1. It is at this point that Katie begins to break down the role. She explains that the sage is basically the same role as the great wizard role, and apparently the crew didn't know this information because they initially expressed confusion at it. Katie sees that they do not know what she is talking about, so she begins to explain that the saint is the ultimate priest, who specializes in recovery magic, and that this role is usually paired with the ultimate mage, the great wizard, which is akin to the sage, who is good at offensive magic. Apparently, the sage is able to use both recovery and attack magic, and she further explained that both roles, the saint and the sage, are supposed to complement each other. According to her, though, she explains that since people aren't usually as balanced as they are expected to be, the owners of these magic roles tend to favor one part of their magic over the others. And she confides in the group that, in Janet's case, she seems to lean towards the great wizard role because she learns offensive magic faster. As a result of this, her recovery magic is naturally below that of a priest. Despite this, she still had the powers and skills of the great wizard, and as the extremely skilled person that she is, she could use recovery magic as well. On hearing this, Emmy begins to wonder if Janet's recovery magic truly is below the capabilities of a priest, talk less of a saint. The implications of this means that she cannot serve as a substitute for a priest in the group. Before she can fully think about the implications, Janet faces Katie again and asks her when priests usually learn the cure skill. To this, Katie closes her eyes sagely and then replies that priests usually learn the cure spell at level 10. Meanwhile, far away from the group, Russell is facing off against monsters in the dungeon on his own, a man who learned his own cure spell at just level 2. From level 6, he is now finally at level 8, and he dispatches demons and monsters with a fervor that only a swordsman of his skill level can replicate. As he announces that he is now on level 8, Sibylla congratulates him and tells him that he is doing great. As they get into stance, back to back so that no monsters catch them unawares, Sibylla informs him that the monsters they are currently fighting have lots of experience points, and as a result, defeating them would allow him to raise his level as quickly as possible. Russell never thought that he would be able to level up this easily by defeating monsters directly, but he informs Sibylla that he has finally learned some new magic. The name of the new spell that he has just learned is Cure Link. On seeing his new spell, he has a disinterested look on his face, and he thinks about the fact that the cure he learned at level 2 is a spell that affects everyone in his group. He then comments to Sibylla that the spell is a bit basic, but she snaps at him, angry that he is downgrading the strength of his spells. According to her, she didn't even know that Cure Link magic existed, and she informs him that this type of magic is basically a pure cure and is something that can change the tide of battle. This confuses Russell, and he asks her what a pure cure is. Sibylla replies by telling him that a pure cure is a complete cure, and that normal healing magic can remove paralysis, sleep, and even poisoning. But that full cure is learned at approximately level 10 for most priests, but that normal priests aren't able to reach level 10 so easily because they cannot defeat monsters. In his own case, though, he has learned cure since level 2, and now he is able to learn more magic because he actually has the skill to defeat monsters on his own. This is coupled with the fact that he seems to be learning magic spells earlier than regular priests do. Apparently, the Cure Link is an extra kind of spell, and Russell mentions that he actually learned it at level 7, but didn't say anything. Ignoring his close-mouthedness, Sibylla seems very gleeful, and she asks him why he didn't mention it before, then informs him that this extra cure spell is ridiculously strong magic. Russell continues to be unimpressed by this, and he points out that he doesn't need any more extra cure spells. However, Sibylla asks him what he thinks is the ultimate recovery magic, and then she explains to him that the spells he is learning are capable of bringing all teammates back to full health all at the same time, even when they are on the verge of death. On hearing this, he sarcastically comments that she seems to know a lot about the healer's magic, and he then asks her if there is anything else that she would like to tell him. To this, she sighs heavily, and then tells him that he seems to have learned everything about healing magic. Going on, she tells him that he has already learned the best recovery magic in his class, and that he is already one of the best in the world, maybe ever. However, Russell doesn't seem satisfied, and he then asks her if there is any sort of enhancement magic that he can use to help him with attacking. But she replies the enhancement magic is only for roles like that of mages like her, or magic swordsmen. Furthermore, she informs him that there is no sort of attack magic for recovery roles, and that, ordinarily, a class specializing in recovery doesn't have time to start learning attack magic. On hearing this, Russell begins to reflect on the fact that this means that even if he is in the heroes group, he still wouldn't be able to participate in the offensive effort. And as a result of this, he starts to question his worth and believe that, as a saint, he is essentially useless in the end. As he thinks about this, he receives a hard slap, and when he turns to glare at Sibylla, she relates to him that she knows what he is thinking, and that she thinks he should be a little more satisfied with his skills, since they are very rare. She reiterates that the link spell works with all allies he recognizes, and that it can be used anywhere, even in extreme emergency cases, like when a city castle is attacked by a deadly disease. Going on, she reminds him that with this ability, he can essentially heal a country, and can even heal them in a single stroke if he wants to do so. Also, she then asks him if he has heard about the legend of the saint. To this, he retains a confused look on his face, and Sibylla takes this as an incentive to begin the story. In the Book of the Goddess, the saint's prayers were integral to the destruction of the demon-infested miasma that was enveloping the entire country. Apparently, the saint's prayers were heard by the goddess, and immediately all the villagers who were afflicted were cured on the same day. After this was done, the saint fell asleep for days. Although this was what happened in the Book of the Goddess, Sibylla mentions that this is most likely just a retelling, and that what likely happened is that the saintess secretly used Cure Link on the entire village, and then fell asleep because her magic was exhausted. After her story, she tells Russell that he is presently as powerful as a legend, and then she asks him why he is still complaining about his lack of magic despite this. Initially, Russell keeps an odd look on his face, and the fact of what she has said finally dawns on him. He really is presently as powerful as a legend, and soon he comments that he isn't as bad as to complain about everything that he has. Suddenly, he breaks into a gentle smile, and then thanks Sibylla for everything she has done for him. On the other hand, Sibylla didn't expect a compliment, so she begins to blush, and then, to ensure that the moment doesn't get too tender, she snaps at him, asking him if he is this way with everyone, and also starts to demand to know if he has fallen in love with her. Russell only looks at her with a bored look on his face, but she continues to tease him, and then begins to mimic him confessing his love to her. She urges him to speak his mind and confess his love to her, but he smacks her on the head and then walks away while she nurses the swelling. He then calls back to tell her that break time is over, and that they should continue to get rid of the monsters so they can move on. After coming down a stairway, they get to the second level, and Russell comments that there are too many monsters for the first level only. The second level seems to be the purple floor, but suddenly, Sibylla mutters something in alarm. When Russell questions her, she tells him that the dungeons are usually divided into upper, middle, and lower floors. Apparently, the upper level is a normal rocky surface, the middle level is a floor that runs blue, and then further, in the end, the lower layer is one that usually turns red. They were at the purple level, which meant, as Sibylla had guessed, that they were at the lowest level of the dungeon, the level of the dungeons, also known as Underworld, which was usually where they lived and were summoned from. Here, Sibylla informs him that the second level usually would be the hardest he would face, but then he asks her what kind of dungeon this is. Before they walk deeper into the dungeon, they are met with a very dark aura that surrounds them. After a while, the aura coalesces into a dark mass, and before it fully forms, it talks. With a raspy, evil voice, it informs them that Sibylla is wrong with her projection, and that in this dungeon, there are only 2 levels, which it created personally. As the dark mass begins to form into a more solid shape, It seems to be a large but slim humanoid figure, in a jester's robe, holding a torch to light